you to do is I want you to go into as great as detail as you can.
Okay. I know when he had the gun pointed at me around the car and everything, I fired on him. He does this number, and I see his whole body spin, and I saw like a flash, a silver flash with like a metallic flash. Hey man, police, can I help you? And second,
that's Officer Newman Raja in the brown t-shirt and jeans. Dressed in plain clothes, he was working a covert burglary operation. It's 7:30 in the morning, just 4.5 hours after the fatal shooting of Corey Jones.
And at which point, that's when he jumped back and I saw him draw the gun right at me, right after I said the word police, and it was just like...
Raja is walking investigators through what happened, telling them Jones pointed a gun at him.
I remember pulling the trigger, I think 2 to 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
And he started running. And as he was running, I had my cell phone and I dialed, and I still remember putting my code in, and just like this, I had the gun, and I'm keeping an eye on this guy, and I put my code in, dialed 911, and I called dispatch right away because my radio was in the van. And the whole time, I'm like giving him commands, I'm yelling, screaming at him, I'm like, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun!
Corey Jones did drop the gun some 40 yards from where he collapsed. Prosecutors say he was running for his life and was no threat to Raja when the officer fired again. 3 more times, one of those shots ripping through his heart. Police recovered Jones's gun. It had not been fired. Its safety still engaged. This is what the crime scene looks like these days in daylight. What happened here is the focus of the state's case against Newman Raja. And this makeshift memorial marks the spot where Corey Jones died.
I'll never forget that day, and I ran out. I was outside on the patio waiting for a friend of mine to get there, and I just sobbed.
Sheila Banks is Jones's maternal aunt and godmother. She says Corey grew up in this church led by her father.
Corey would never, he's not an aggressive person. He's very laid back, very easygoing. He's a fair person. He respects all race. He respects all people. So I knew when they were saying, "Oh, I knew that was not. I knew that was inaccurate."
Jones had a passion for drumming and played in churches and local bands. He had just finished a gig and was on his way home when his car broke down. He pulled off onto this ramp and called his bandmate, Matt Huntsberger.
I wish I would have stayed, but I can't turn back the clock, so it's...
Huntsberger was the last person to see Jones alive before his ill-fated encounter with Raja.
I was there, I was in his car trying to start his car, he was messing with the engine, and I didn't see any gun when I was there, so...
But there was a gun. Jones had purchased a used one just 3 days earlier, and Raja says he pointed it at him and left him no choice.
And all I could think was, my kids, man.
It may have been an open and shut case if it had not been for this woman. Madeline Tolliver answered Jones's call for roadside assistance.
And then I heard yelling and gunshots, and then yelling and more gunshots.
The call captured the exchange between Newman Raja and Corey Jones, seconds before Jones was shot to death.
Stop. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
The call raised questions about Raja's story. Did he clearly identify himself as a police officer? And there was that 911 call that Raja said he made.
And I'm calling 911. Hey, this is...
Here, he says he made the call while he was chasing Jones. But investigators say that call came more than 30 seconds after the last shot.
Aim! And I bang, bang, bang. And I fired.
Those shots, prosecutors contend, were deliberate, calculated with intent to kill, evidence of attempted first-degree murder.
And Court TV anchor Michael Ayala joins us with more background on this case. Michael.
Yeah, Vinny, the case went to trial in March of 2019, but the shooting happened in 2015 in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. Now, that was a very different climate then than the one we see today. That was before Breonna Taylor, before Jacob Blake, before George Floyd. We were at the genesis of the Black Lives Matter movement, which really gained traction in 2014 in response to the shooting of Trayvon Martin. But this shooting was part of a string of police shootings of black men that was being noted around the country. Still, it was a time when police officers were almost untouchable, Vinny. It was very extremely difficult to bring charges against police officers for on-duty shootings, let alone get convictions. Now, in this case, there were no dash cam videos, no body cam video, no bystander video, but there was that recorded phone call, and that was extremely important to this case. Jones was calling for a tow truck, and at least part of the interaction between Jones and Raja was captured on tape. Raja claimed he identified himself as a police officer, but the tape tells a little bit of a different story.
Stop. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. There's gunshots.
Last 3 shots that really caused the problem for Raja. That phone call was repeatedly played for the jury during the trial, Vinny. Prosecution said Raja acted so aggressively and unprofessionally that Jones had no choice but to think he was being carjacked. And even though Raja was on duty, prosecutors say he never showed a badge, he didn't have on his tactical vest or even have his police radio on. After the shooting, he called 911 from his cell phone a full 30 seconds after the shooting. And during the call, he made it sound as if there was still an active shooter. Listen.
911.
Hey, this is Garden. I just got one down. I just shot one person. I'm at that off-ramp right behind Doubletree. Black male.
You're behind the Doubletree?
I'm on the off-ramp, 95 southbound off-ramp, off the Doubletree. I am not covered in anything right now. And give me some units. I got one down. I got one man down. Have 5 ready.
You all right?
Yeah, man, I'm good. Drop the gun.
On the off-ramp, right?
On the off-ramp. Give me some units. I've lost contact with him. I don't know where he is.
All right, you got it, buddy. Where's your radio? Where's your radio?
My radio's in the van right now. I don't have it with me. That's why I'm on the phone.
All right, stay on the phone, buddy. What's the guy look like?
Black male wearing all black dress, had a silver handgun in his right hand. I came out, I saw him come out with a handgun, I gave him commands, I identified myself, and he turned, pointed the gun at me, started running, I shot him.
So prosecutors point out the problems there, Vinny. At the time of this call, 30 seconds after the shooting, Jones was undoubtedly dead. Jones never fired his gun, and the lock was still in place. And prosecutors argued just because he's a police officer, he doesn't get a pass, and that the killing was unwarranted, it was unlawful, and a reckless disregard for human life. They even called it an execution.
If you're broken down, right, and it's dark out, and someone pulls up in this unmarked van and starts coming at you and screaming and yelling, and he's a big guy.
Yes,
he looks like he's a big. That's why in Florida they allow you to carry a weapon like the victim in this case to protect yourself in case you're in a vulnerable position like that and someone comes charging at you in the middle of the night out of a van. I mean, I get it. I get it 1,000%. But what exactly did Raja and his defense claim?
All right, well, Raja claimed self-defense, obviously. He didn't testify at the trial, but in his statements, Raja claimed he approached what he thought was an abandoned car when Jones then pulled the weapon on him and he had no choice but to lawfully fire at Jones. Now, his statement to police differed greatly from the audio that was caught on tape. That was a big problem. And the defense claimed that any differences between his account and the audio recording was caused by the stress of the situation. It was an argument that didn't really carry the day, as the audio of the phone call made Raja's story appear very, very implausible. And the prosecution simply called him a total liar.
Yeah, and he had no idea that whole thing was being recorded. I mean, right? He's on the phone trying to get help because he's broken down in his car. That's being recorded. He has no idea, so he comes up with his story. So how did it all turn out?
All right, well, Vinny, after an 8-day trial, an all-white jury deliberated for just under 5 hours before delivering their verdict. Now, they had asked to hear the roadside audio again. They also asked for the transcripts of Raja's statements about the events of that evening before reaching their decision. Here it is.
We, the jury, find as follows. As to count 1, we find a defendant guilty of manslaughter while armed with a firearm as charged in the information. As to count 2, we found a defendant guilty of attempted first-degree murder as charged in the information. If you find a defendant guilty of attempted first-degree murder, you must next answer the following questions. Did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant actually possessed a firearm? Yes. Did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant actually discharged a firearm? Yes. Did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant in discharging the firearm actually caused great bodily harm or death to Corey L. Jones? Yes.
So there it was. He was convicted on all charges, manslaughter and first-degree attempted murder. Both charges hold a mandatory minimum of 25 years to life. Raja was 41 years old at the time of the shooting. He was married, he had 2 young children, and he was facing the prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars. And Vinny, tomorrow, we will highlight the sentencing of Raja. We will have victim impact statements and the reaction of the family and friends to the verdict. We'll also tell you about Raja's appeals as well, so the case is not completely over yet.
All right, and we'll be doing this all week long, taking a look at police officers on trial. We have an incredible library here at Court TV as we build up just 7 days away from the George Floyd case. Michael, thanks so much.
You're welcome.